Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, Alan Bishop. So, here in the Golden Eagle Tavern, I actually got a little mascot now that I picked up at a local flea market. Because if you're going to call it the Golden Eagle, you got to have a damn Golden Eagle, right? So, it's pretty cool, I think. But here's always to answer your questions about the art of distillation, whether it be professional and or home distilling. I will help where I can. So, today we have a question and a response, and then I will respond. So our good friend Bob in Costa Rica has oftentimes very good questions, and has started playing around with Badmotivator barrels, and there are oftentimes threads going between me and Bob and Wayne Herbert of Ozark Stillworks, or me and Bob and Christopher Conrad of Badmotivator barrels. This is one of the later today, so this is from Bob. Hey Alan, last year I thought I would never manage to acquire a Badmo barrel because of supply issues. In recent months, their availability has greatly increased, and I now have several waiting to be filled. Being new to this process, I have some questions. For Badmo barrels, what is a preferred proof for barreling? I prefer most of my spirits to bottle in the 80 to 90 proof range. I believe that is generally considered too low for barreling. I understand that commercial barrel strength can run quite high. For example, if barreling proof is 140, is it common to proof down after barrel aging? Is it acceptable to proof down a Badmo barrel after aging? Is 80 proof for loading a Badmo barrel a bad idea? I hope you can get me on the right path for longer term aging. Thanks for all your great content. Looking forward to more in the future. So he also sent this to Christopher Conrad, and I will answer Bob's questions my way shortly, but I'm going to read you Christopher's responses too. Hi Bob, it's great to hear from you, and your question about barrel entry proof is a good one. I'd love to take a crack at it, and I'm CCing Alan on my response. In the United States, bourbon must adhere to strict guidelines set by the TTB. Bourbon is defined as whiskey produced in the U.S. at not exceeding 80% alcohol by volume, 160 proof, from a fermented mash of not less than 51% corn. It must also be stored at not more than 62.5% alcohol by volume, or 125 proof, in charred new oak containers. Now, when it comes to aging spirits, the rules can vary depending on the type of spirit and distiller's preferences. For instance, I personally like my corn-based spirits to be aged a lower entry proof, typically between 105 and 110. On the other hand, I'm playing the higher entry proof for my apple brandy, around 140 proof. The future will reveal whether I decide to lower my apple brandy back down to 107 proof. There's a rich history of aging spirits around 110 proof, and it's only in recent time that entry proofs have reached such high levels. This choice of entry proof can significantly impact the flavor profile of the final product. Different chemical compounds are more soluble in either water or alcohol, allowing distillers to fine-tune their preferred flavor profiles. For example, wood sugars are more soluble at higher entry proofs, while tannins are as well. Lower entry proofs can result in a higher concentration of wood flavors and can help slow down the extraction of tannins, which can be a sign that maturation is complete. In essence, the choice of barrel entry proof is a crucial part of the distillation process, allowing distillers to craft spirits with specific flavor characteristics and profiles. Regarding the Jack Daniel's wood, I appreciate the offer. Well, that's separate from this. But anyways, okay, so here are my thoughts. Traditionally, bourbon and rye were almost always entered into the barrel pre-prohibition at between 105 and 110 proof, not the higher end 125. The higher entry proof came later on as a maximum, and it was really put in place so that distilleries would not have to buy so many barrels. Because if you're proofing down your distillate to 105 proof or whatever, 110, whatever's considered traditional, you're going to have to buy more barrels and have more expenditure going into barrels, plus more room to actually age those barrels, mature those barrels, and store those barrels, correct? So for me, I've always gone with my whiskeys, with my rye whiskey, my bourbon whiskey, my single malt whiskeys, all those things, I tend to go low entry proof. The other reason for that is that it is completely acceptable to try to balance the barrel to raw distillate flavor. In other words, how much do you want after maturation of that raw distillate flavor versus how much do you want contributed by the wood. The water is typically a better solvent on wood than what ethanol is, and as such, at a lower proof, I can get extraction of more complex flavor characteristics from the barrel than I can at a higher proof. The other thing that happens is that lower proof, because of the way that a barrel works and the way the barrel breathes, you actually get some destabilization of the alcohol molecules. You get some oxidization that's happening during maturation, which increases the esterification of some of the chemical compounds that are in the barrel. As we've said many times on this channel, the liquid that comes back out of that barrel after maturation is chemically not the same liquid that went into the barrel before maturation. It has gone through an alchemical process and it has changed over time. There are now new chemical components involved there because of that reaction with oxidization. The higher proof you go in, the more of that original distillate sort of characteristic you maintain. Now, here's my other part of it. When it comes to brandy, and I do disagree with Christopher just a little bit here on this one piece. Traditionally, brandy, especially Calvados and cognac, have always been entered into the barrel at still proof. Now, those proofs may have changed over time with technology somewhat, or with the harvest and the yield, etc. But typically, 135 plus or minus proof is very, very common for traditional apple brandy, cognacs, Calvados, all of those sort of things. The rationale behind that is that leaving it at that higher proof allows you to hold on to more of the characteristics of the raw material you're working with, right? If you're going to make an apple brandy, you still want to make sure that you hold on to some of those apple brandy characteristics after maturation. If we lower the proof before we go into the barrel, we will get more esterification, but we might potentially lose the nose of the actual apple, the quintessence of the actual apple, the variety of the apple, etc., and make it a little bit more muddy. So you go in at higher proof, and then what happens is over time, as that barrel evaporates, every year you pull that barrel down and you add a little bit of water to it to proof it down slowly over time so that you don't shock the spirit, cause saponification by quick proofing, which literally is what it sounds like. It tastes and smells like soap because you're creating soap molecules. This allows us to really hold on to more of the nose and the flavor of the raw material that we're starting with. Now, there are certain times I will do this with certain whiskeys. A good example would be something like what we call the Whiskey Witch at Spirits of French Lick, which was, I don't remember the mash bill off the top of my head, but it is a smoked malted barley, wheat, and oat whiskey, based very much so on what was happening in Scotland and Ireland prior to modern day Scottish or Irish whiskey. That whiskey has a lot of really crazy, almost botanical-like characters because the smoke that is used on that grain is actually peat from up in northern Indiana. And it brings a lot of those sort of crazy profiles through. I want to hold on to those crazy profiles. So I initially barreled that into brandy barrels at high proof, 135 or so. After 4 years of aging in brandy barrels, I pulled all that out, I blended it, and I dropped it to the 120s, and then I split it between New American Oak and used Lee W. Sinclair 4-grain bourbon whiskey barrels. Again, to sort of split the difference between the two of them, right? To not have such a high proof, but not have a crazy low proof. I want to, again, maintain what makes that whiskey what it is, right? The reason that the low entry proof existed for pre-prohibition bourbon and rye, by the way, is because there really wasn't a whole lot of bottling going on until you get into the late 1800s, early 1900s. The vast majority of the whiskey was sold by the barrel to the person who would then break that up and sell it in bottles or in jugs or whatever you brought in to him. So the preference was always to have whiskey that was close to 100 proof. That was considered a mark of quality, up to and even after the Bottled and Bond Act. Almost everybody drank their whiskey at 100 proof. That was just a very, 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 very common thing. As far as entering at those low proofs, the 80s, the 90s, etc., the real problem with that is, depending on your environment, you're either going to increase in proof as you go or decrease in proof as you go. So if you go in at 90, for example, what happens if you lose proof, right? And you might lose 5 points, 6 points, 7 points, depending on how old it is, that could really, really affect the flavor profile very greatly. We really walk the line at Spirits of French Lick with our large barrel warehouses, because in there we lose proof. And so our barrel entry on the whiskeys is 105. A lot of times those whiskeys that are coming out of those outside rack houses, those are coming back in after 5-6 years, and they're down to 101, 102, sometimes 98, sometimes 97. When I'm blending for Bottled and Bond, which has to be 100 proof, to be called bottled and bond, I have to be very, very careful how I blend those lower proof barrels to make sure that I don't go below 100 proof on my aggregate in my mix, if that makes sense. So anyways, I think that probably gave you at least an idea of where I stand on these sort of things. And all that Christopher had a great response to, and I'm glad that Bob asked these questions. I'm really enjoying working with Christopher from Badmotivator. About to put in the second shelf in here, the second barrel shelf, because I do have some new Badmos. I'm playing around with some cool stuff. Bob had sent Christopher some Jack Daniel's wood that Christopher sent back to me as a Badmo, and I did 100% corn whiskey in that. Christopher just recently sent me some other barrels, including a rum barrel. Now I've done 100% rye in that. I'm working on a lot of component whiskey stuff right now, specifically sort of Canadian style components, double distilled, older Canadian style, double distilled, slightly rectified, maybe average proof of 155 to 160 versus 135. High barrel entry, typically used barrels. There's going to be some new barrels in here too, but I'm going to do it. I've done 100% corn, 100% rye. I've got 100% barley coming, 100% barley malt. 100% oat is next. After I finish that little project, I'm going to get with Christopher, get another set of barrels, and then we will go 100% malted corn, 100% malted rye, 100% malted wheat, 100% malted oats, etc. So I think having those components for blending down the road 4 or 5 years in these Badmos, that might be kind of cool, right? Really have control instead of having a mash bill, have control of the percentages of the actual whiskey that's 100% of each of those grains to blend together and see what you can really come up with. So anyways, guys, I mentioned in the last video, and I'm going to mention it here too in case somebody missed it, because they'll see it and they'll say something. We've been, doing some aunt and uncle stuff with our nieces, my daughter's cousins, all little girls. And so last evening I was hanging out with them, and my daughter, who's 8, and the youngest cousin, who's also 8, they wanted to give me a spa day. So I didn't notice this till about halfway through filming the previous video that my fingernails are still painted from last night. So yes, I have sparkly fingernails. It is what it is. It doesn't bother me. It shouldn't bother you. But take a gander, give it a good laugh. It's all good. All right, guys. I love y'all. I'll catch you later. Bye.